Imagine standing in the center of Times Square. Neon billboards scream for your credit card, thousands of pedestrians brush past you, and a dozen different songs bleed into a single metallic roar. Your brain is a supercomputer, but even a supercomputer has a thermal limit. Now, realize that for the modern human, Times Square never truly ends. Even in the quiet of our bedrooms, the blue light of a smartphone acts as a digital megaphone, funneling the anxieties, opinions, and advertisements of 8 billion people directly into our consciousness. We are the first generation in history to treat silence not as a natural state, but as a technical malfunction. To understand the gravity of this, consider the hummingbird effect in modern cognitive psychology. A hummingbird's heart beats up to 1,200 times per minute. It is a creature defined by frantic, high-energy output that requires constant refueling. We have become cognitive hummingbirds. We check our phones an average of 150 times a day, twitching at every haptic buzz. This isn't just a bad habit, it is a sensory overload crisis. Our nervous systems were evolved for the slow rustle of leaves and the occasional crack of thunder, not for the infinite scroll and the 24-hour outrage cycle. We are operating on biological hardware that is being overclocked by digital software, leading to a state of permanent type A sympathetic nervous system activation. A poignant real-world example of this crisis can be found in the phenomenon of decision fatigue among high-level executives. A famous study of parole board judges revealed that as the day progressed and the sensory and cognitive load increased, the likelihood of a prisoner being granted parole plummeted. It wasn't that the prisoners were more dangerous in the afternoon, it was that the judges' brains were so overloaded by the noise of constant decision-making and data processing that they defaulted to the easiest, most conservative option: no. When our sensory input exceeds our processing capacity, our empathy, our logic, and our long-term vision are the first things to shut down. We stop being creators and start being reactive processors. The noise floor of our lives has risen so high that we have lost the ability to hear our own internal monologue. In the 21st century, silence is often perceived as a void, and humans have a primal horror vacui, a fear of empty spaces. We fill the gaps in our commute with podcasts, the gaps in our chores with television, and the gaps in our elevator rides with social media. By doing so, we are effectively starving our brains of the white space necessary for cognitive consolidation. This perpetual state of overload doesn't just make us tired, it fragments our identity. When every second is filled with external input, there is no room left for the self to emerge. We are becoming a collection of the last 5 things we read online, rather than coherent individuals with a centered perspective. In 2013, a group of regenerative biologists at the University of Rostock in Germany set out to study how different sounds, birdsong, white noise, and music affected the brains of mice. They included 2 hours of total silence as a control group, expecting it to be the baseline of zero activity. What they found instead sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The mice exposed to silence didn't just rest, they began to grow. Specifically, the researchers observed a significant increase in neurogenesis, the birth of brand new neurons within the hippocampus. This is the region of the brain responsible for memory, spatial navigation, and emotional regulation. Silence, it turned out, wasn't a state of nothing, it was a biological fertilizer. To understand why this happens, we have to look at the brain's internal energy management. When we are bombarded by noise, our brains are in a state of external processing mode. We are scanning for threats, interpreting speech, and reacting to pings. But the moment the room goes quiet, the brain doesn't turn off. It flips a metabolic switch to the default mode network, a system that is vital to long-term health. Think of this as the brain's maintenance and integration phase. During this period, the brain begins to consolidate memories, process complex emotions, and connect disparate ideas.
It is the neurobiological equivalent of a city road crew coming out at 3 a.m. to repair the potholes while the traffic is gone. Without the silence, the repairs to our cognitive hardware never happen, and the system begins to degrade. A powerful real-world example of this silent recovery can be seen in the recovery protocols of elite athletes and special operations soldiers suffering from mild traumatic brain injuries or extreme burnout. In high-pressure environments, the brain is constantly flooded with glutamate, a neurotransmitter that, in excess, can become excitotoxic, essentially frying the neural pathways. Specialists have found that sensory deprivation or silent flotation therapy, where an individual floats in a soundproof, pitch-black tank of salt water, can drastically accelerate neural recovery. In the absence of external data, the amygdala, the fear center, finally stands down, allowing the prefrontal cortex to re-establish dominance. For these individuals, silence isn't just a luxury, it is the only environment in which the brain can physically heal itself. Beyond repair, silence acts as a cognitive reset for our internal clock. Most of us live in a state of attention restoration theory deficit. Our directed attention, the kind we use to focus on a spreadsheet or a difficult conversation, is a finite resource. It gets exhausted. Silence allows for involuntary attention, where the mind can wander without a goal. This wandering is where the aha moments of genius are born. When you are in the shower or walking through a quiet forest, your brain is finally free to move the furniture of your thoughts around. By denying ourselves silence, we are effectively starving our hippocampus of the very environment it needs to turn short-term information into long-term wisdom. We aren't just losing our quiet, we are losing our ability to learn from our own lives.
We have been conditioned to view a pause in conversation as a failure, a glitch in the social matrix that must be patched immediately with a you know, an or a nervous laugh. This is because silence creates a social vacuum, a localized area of high psychological pressure. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the human ego. When the sound stops, the subtext starts. In that sudden quiet, we are forced to confront the unfiltered presence of the person sitting across from us, and, more uncomfortably, the unfiltered presence of ourselves. Most people are so desperate to escape this tension that they will say anything, reveal a secret, lower a price, or offer a premature apology, just to stop the clock. To master communication is to realize that the person who is most comfortable with the vacuum is the person who controls the room. High-status individuals do not rush to fill the air. They understand that silence acts as a psychological mirror. It reflects the other person's anxieties back at them. When you respond to a question with a deliberate 3-second pause, you aren't just thinking, you are demonstrating emotional sovereignty. You are signaling that you are not reactive, that you are not intimidated by the expectations of others, and that your words are heavy enough to require a foundation of quiet before they are delivered. A masterclass in this social vacuum can be found in the interrogation techniques of the most successful FBI hostage negotiators, such as Chris Voss. In his work, silence is termed the effective pause. Voss recounts instances where, after a high-stakes demand is made by a kidnapper, the negotiator simply stays quiet. In the ensuing 10, 20, or even 30 seconds of dead air, the kidnapper's brain begins to spiral. The silence creates a demand for information. To break the crushing weight of the quiet, the perpetrator often begins to over-explain their position, inadvertently revealing their true stresses, their location, or their willingness to settle for less. By doing nothing, the negotiator gains everything. Beyond negotiation, the social vacuum is where active listening actually happens. Most of us don't listen, we just wait for our turn to speak. True silence in communication means giving the other person the floor even after they have finished their sentence.
Often, the most profound thing a person has to say is the thing they say after they thought they were done, simply because you gave them the space to continue. By refusing to rush in, you allow the second thought to emerge, the one that contains the truth. In this way, silence isn't just a power play, it is the ultimate form of respect. It tells the other person what you are saying is worth the time it takes to process it.
In the theater of high-stakes commerce, the most expensive mistake you can make is talking too much. We are taught from a young age that persuasion involves a flurry of words, arguments, benefits, and rebuttals. But in a professional negotiation, talk is often cheap, while silence is appreciating. Silence in this context is known as a strategic gap. It is a calculated refusal to provide the social grease that makes a transaction comfortable. By removing the comfort, you force the other party to negotiate against themselves. When you present an offer and then lock your jaw, you are essentially daring the other side to justify why your terms shouldn't be accepted. The mechanics of this work through a principle called the burden of the silence. In any interaction, the person who feels the most responsible for the flow of the conversation is the one who holds the weaker hand. When you drop a number on the table, whether it's a salary requirement, a business acquisition price, or a contract bid, and then stop talking, you transfer the entire weight of the interaction onto your opponent. They are left alone with your figure, and every second of silence that follows makes that figure feel more solid, more immovable, and more authoritative. If you speak first, you weaken your own position by showing a need for approval or a fear of rejection. A legendary real-world example of this occurred during the contract negotiations of the iconic actor Sir Laurence Olivier. Known for his poise, Olivier once sat through an entire afternoon meeting with studio executives regarding a film role. When the producers made an initial offer that was significantly lower than his worth, Olivier didn't counteroffer, and he didn't get angry. He simply sat in total, tranquil silence, looking at the executives with mild interest. The silence stretched for minutes. Unnerved by his stillness, the producers began to talk to fill the air, eventually raising the offer 3 times, each time bidding against their own previous number, before Olivier finally nodded and said, "That will do." He won the negotiation without uttering a single argument. This strategy isn't just for Hollywood stars, it is a fundamental tool for value perception. When you rush to fill silence, you signal that you are selling. When you embrace silence, you signal that you are providing. In financial consulting or high-end sales, silence after a pitch allows the client to perform the necessary mental accounting. They are calculating their ROI, their risks, and their internal buy-in. If you interrupt that silence with more features and benefits, you break their concentration and reset their decision-making clock. By mastering the post-offer pause, you aren't just being quiet, you are giving the other person the space they need to say yes to you. In the lexicon of leadership, there is a distinct difference between noise and command. Most people equate leadership with the ability to speak fluently and frequently, but the most impactful leaders often do the exact opposite. They utilize silence to cultivate gravitas, that elusive quality of weight, dignity, and importance. Gravitas is built on the foundation of self-regulation. When a leader refuses to rush their words, they signal to the room that they are the master of their own time and temperament. In a crisis, the person who speaks the loudest is often viewed as the most panicked. The person who remains silent, absorbing the data before delivering a measured response, is the one the room naturally pivots toward. This leadership pause functions as a cognitive filter. By slowing down the tempo of an interaction, a leader forces their subordinates and peers to think more deeply. If a CEO answers every question instantly, they inadvertently train their team to stop thinking and start downloading instructions. However, when a leader greets a problem with a thoughtful 5-second silence, they create a theater of importance. That silence says, "This issue is significant enough to deserve my full mental bandwidth."
It creates a hush in the organization that demands quality over quantity. This is how silence transforms a manager into a visionary. It moves the focus from the transaction of information to the transformation of ideas. A profound real-world example of this can be found in the leadership style of Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. Known for his monastic level of calm, Cook is famous for his legendary long silences in meetings. Colleagues have noted that he can sit for minutes in total stillness while an executive presents, simply staring at them without blinking. This isn't an interrogation tactic, it's a standard of excellence. Those who work with him know that if they haven't done their homework, the silence will expose them. If they have done their work, the silence provides the space for a breakthrough. Cook uses silence to ensure that when he finally does speak, his words have the impact of a gavel rather than the buzz of a fly. Furthermore, silence serves as the ultimate tool for executive presence in public speaking and boardrooms. We are biologically wired to associate slow, deliberate movement in speech with high social status. Think of the measured gait of a lion versus the frantic scurrying of a mouse. By incorporating the power pause before a key point in a speech or after a challenging question from a journalist, a leader demonstrates that they cannot be provoked or rushed. This creates a gravity well effect. The more quiet and centered the leader remains, the more the rest of the organization's energy begins to orbit around them. In a world of chaotic chatter, the person who can hold the silence is the only one truly capable of leading the way out of it.
In the world of personal finance, your greatest liability isn't a bad stock pick, it's the cacophony of the now. We are living through an era of financial infobesity, where a 24-hour news cycle must manufacture urgency to survive. Every tick of the market is framed as a crisis, and every fluctuation is treated as a call to action. This is market noise, a high-frequency, low-value stream of data designed to trigger your amygdala. For the average investor, this noise creates a psychological state known as action bias, the misguided belief that in times of volatility, doing something is inherently better than doing nothing. In reality, the most expensive words in the English language are often, "I have to do something." To build true wealth, one must master the art of financial silence. This is the ability to distinguish between the signal, long-term economic trends, company fundamentals, and compound interest, and the noise, quarterly earnings whispers, social media hype, and daily price volatility. Wealth is not built in the frantic energy of the trading floor. It is built in the quiet intervals between decisions. When you turn off the notifications and stop checking your portfolio every hour, you aren't just saving time, you are preserving your behavioral alpha. You are giving your investments the one thing they need most to thrive: time, uninterrupted by your own anxiety. A definitive real-world example of the power of financial silence can be found in the coffee can portfolio, popularized by investment advisor Robert Kirby. The idea stems from the Old West, where people would put all their valuable possessions in a coffee can and hide it under the mattress. In an investment context, it refers to buying a diversified group of high-quality stocks and then, this is the crucial part, doing absolutely nothing for 10 years. One famous instance involved a woman who followed her husband's professional stock picks but never sold a single share, even when he did. Decades later, her silent portfolio, untouched by the noise of market timing or panicked selling, significantly outperformed her husband's actively managed account. Her silence was her most profitable strategy. The signal-to-noise ratio is the ultimate metric for a rational investor. When you increase the noise, you decrease the clarity of your strategy. Most market news is actually just noise masquerading as insight. It focuses on the temporary at the expense of the permanent. By intentionally practicing periods of financial fasting, times when you deliberately look away from the markets and the headlines, you recalibrate your brain to think in decades rather than days.
This silence acts as a protective barrier around your capital. It allows the mathematical miracle of compound interest to work its magic without the frictional costs of emotional trading, taxes, and fees. In the end, the loudest voices in the market are rarely the ones with the highest returns. Would you like to proceed to point 7, exploring the creative crucible and how silence fosters innovation?
Every masterpiece begins with a blank canvas, and every profound breakthrough begins with a blank mind. In the realm of innovation, silence is the creative crucible, the high-pressure, low-distraction environment where disparate ideas are finally allowed to collide and fuse. Most people believe that creativity is a loud, collaborative process filled with whiteboards and brainstorming sessions. However, the history of genius suggests otherwise. While collaboration can refine an idea, it is silence that births it. Creativity requires a period of incubation, a stage where the conscious mind steps back and allows the subconscious to take the wheel. Without silence, the subconscious is drowned out by the static of the external world. The mechanics of this process are tied to what psychologists call aha moments or insights. When we are focused on a task, the noise phase, our brains utilize narrow focus thinking. This is excellent for execution, but terrible for innovation. True creativity requires diffuse focus thinking, which only happens when we stop actively trying to solve the problem and enter a state of quiet. In these moments of stillness, the brain's prefrontal filters relax, allowing the right hemisphere to make long-distance neural connections that were previously blocked by the roar of concentrated effort. Silence is the medium that makes the invisible visible. The most striking real-world example of this is the Think Week ritual practiced by Bill Gates. Since the 1980s, at the height of Microsoft's chaotic growth, Gates would disappear twice a year to a secret, secluded cabin in the woods. No employees, no family, and, most importantly, no internet. He would bring nothing but a stack of papers and the sound of the wind through the trees. It was during these periods of total acoustic and social silence that he wrote the famous Internet Tidal Wave memo, which completely pivoted Microsoft's strategy in the 90s. He realized that to see the future, he had to stop listening to the present. He wasn't just resting, he was using silence as a strategic lens to sharpen his vision. This incubation in the void is a biological necessity for anyone seeking to create something original. When we are constantly consuming, scrolling through feeds, listening to podcasts, answering emails, we are in a state of input overload. There is no room for the output. Think of your mind like a glass of water filled with silt. As long as you keep shaking it, the water remains cloudy. Only when you set the glass down and let it stay perfectly still does the silt settle, leaving the water crystal clear. By scheduling quiet time or deep work blocks, you aren't just being productive, you are providing the necessary white space that turns a collection of raw data into a coherent, revolutionary idea. Silence is never neutral. It is a choice that carries profound moral weight. In the ethical landscape, silence is a double-edged sword. It can be a sanctuary of wisdom and self-restraint, or it can be a desert of cowardice. The challenge for the modern leader or citizen is discerning the golden silence, the refusal to engage in petty gossip, trivial outrage, or the trial by social media, from the deadly silence, the failure to speak up when the truth is being distorted or the vulnerable are being harmed. Ethics, in this sense, is the art of knowing when silence is a shield for your character and when it is a shroud for your conscience. To understand the positive ethical power of silence, we must look at the concept of dignified restraint. In an era of call-out culture, the most ethical move is often to refuse to participate in the noise. When someone attacks your character with a falsehood, your instinct is to roar back. But a vocal defense often lends a sense of legitimacy to a baseless claim. By choosing silence, you communicate that the accusation is beneath the dignity of a response.
This is the ethics of strategic non-engagement. It preserves your energy for battles that actually matter and prevents the spread of toxic misinformation. Here, silence is a form of moral hygiene, keeping your personal environment clean of unnecessary conflict. However, the shadow side of this topic is found in the bystander effect and the ethics of complicity. A haunting real-world example of the failure of silence was the story of the 1986 Challenger space shuttle disaster. Engineers at Morton Thiokol, the company that built the shuttle's rocket boosters, knew the O-rings were at risk of failing in cold temperatures. On the night before the launch, there were heated discussions and warnings. However, under immense political and corporate pressure to proceed, a silent consensus took over the room. Those who had the data felt the crushing weight of the hierarchy and chose to remain quiet during the final vote. Their silence wasn't a lack of knowledge, it was a lack of courage. 7 lives were lost because the vacuum of silence was filled with fear rather than truth. Navigating the ethics of silence requires a personal moral compass. You must ask yourself, is my silence serving my ego, or is it serving the truth? If you are quiet because you are afraid of the social consequences of speaking, your silence is a compromise of your integrity. But if you are quiet because you are waiting for all the facts, or because a response would only add fuel to a destructive fire, your silence is a virtue. Mastering the power of silence means taking responsibility for what you don't say as much as for what you do. It is about becoming a steward of the space, ensuring that when you finally break the silence, your words possess the weight of honesty and the clarity of conviction.
We are the architects of our own distraction. Most of our living and working spaces are designed for open concept flow, which is often just a polite term for uninterrupted interruption. Our environments are leaking. Notifications bleed into dinner, street noise bleeds into sleep, and the hum of appliances creates a constant low-frequency background radiation that keeps our nervous systems in a state of yellow alert. To reclaim the power of silence, we must treat it as a physical resource, something that must be engineered into our surroundings. This is environmental architecture, the deliberate act of building a quiet zone that serves as a neurological airlock between the chaos of the world and the sanctity of the self. The science of acoustic hygiene suggests that our brains never truly stop listening, even when we are asleep. Constant ambient noise, the neighbor's leaf blower, the distant siren, the whir of a computer fan, forces the brain to expend constant energy on filtering. Over time, this leads to sensory fatigue, where our ability to focus on complex tasks is degraded by the sheer effort of ignoring our environment. Creating a quiet zone isn't about luxury, it's about efficiency. By using physical barriers like sound dampening panels, heavy curtains, or even pink noise generators to mask unpredictable spikes in sound, we lower the cognitive load on our brains, allowing us to redirect that salvaged energy toward deep work and emotional recovery. A compelling real-world example of this architectural mastery can be seen in the silent libraries of Japan, or more specifically, the forest therapy stations found in the Nagano prefecture. The Japanese government has designated dozens of forests as Shinrin-yoku, forest bathing sites, specifically engineered for silence. These aren't just parks, they are managed environments where the topography and plant life are selected to absorb human noise and amplify the biophony, the natural sounds of the earth. Visitors report a dramatic drop in blood pressure and a 12% decrease in cortisol levels after just 20 minutes. They didn't just find silence, they entered a space designed to communicate with their biology. This is the gold standard for a quiet zone, an environment that tells your nervous system you are safe, you can stop scanning for threats. To build your own quiet zone at home or in the office, you must apply the rule of the sacred space.
This means designating a specific physical area, even if it's just a single chair or a corner of a room, where the noise is strictly forbidden. This isn't just about sound, it's about digital noise. In this zone, there are no screens, no haptic buzzes, and no to-do lists. You are training your brain through Pavlovian association. When you enter this physical space, your body begins to down-regulate automatically. By curating your environment with intention, incorporating soft textures, natural light, and perhaps the total lack of electronic humming, you create a gravity well of stillness that pulls you out of the frantic stream of the modern age and back into the center of your own life. Throughout this journey, we have explored how silence affects our brains, our bank accounts, and our leadership. But all of these are external applications. The mastery of the self is the ability to achieve internal silence, the capacity to remain still even when the world around you is screaming. Most of us live in a state of mental overcrowding, where a relentless narrator in our heads comments on every mistake, anticipates every future disaster, and rehashes every past regret. This internal noise is the ultimate thief of peace. Mastery begins when you stop being the narrator and start being the observer. This internal stillness is built upon a concept known as the gap. Between a stimulus, an insulting email, a market crash, a child's tantrum, there is a space. In that space lies your freedom and your power. If the gap is filled with noise, with reactive ego and habitual fear, you are a slave to your environment. But if you can keep that gap silent, you gain the ability to choose your response with surgical precision. This is the difference between an impulsive reaction and a strategic action. Internal silence doesn't mean your mind is empty. It means your mind is ordered. It is the difference between a cluttered attic and a curated gallery. A legendary real-world example of this internal mastery can be found in the story of Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the horrors of the Holocaust. In the midst of the most extreme sensory and physical degradation imaginable, Frankl discovered that his captors could control everything: his food, his clothing, his physical movement, except for one thing: the last of the human freedoms. This was the ability to choose his own internal attitude in any given set of circumstances. By cultivating a space of internal silence and purpose, he was able to endure the unendurable. He realized that the noise of the camps could not penetrate the sanctuary of his inner life unless he allowed it to. His survival was a testament to the fact that the soul can remain quiet even when the body is in a storm. To achieve this mastery, you must commit to the 5-minute daily sovereignty. This is a practical habit where you sit in total stillness, not to meditate in a religious sense, but to perform a cognitive audit. For 5 minutes, you do nothing. You don't try to stop your thoughts. You simply watch them pass like clouds in the sky. By refusing to engage with the noise of your own mind, you begin to weaken the egoic chatter. You start to realize that you are not your thoughts. You are the silence in which those thoughts occur. This shift in perspective is the ultimate power move. It allows you to walk through a chaotic office, a volatile market, or a heated argument with a core of untouchable calm. In a world that is only getting louder, silence is the ultimate luxury, the ultimate weapon, and the ultimate wisdom. It is the architecture upon which a meaningful life is built. From the neurogenesis in your hippocampus to the post-offer pause in a boardroom, the power of silence is the power of presence. We have spent this deep dive exploring the architecture of absence, but as you step back into your life, remember this: silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of everything else. It is the space where you finally become the master of yourself.